No one living remembered a time when the tower door had opened and Wren was the only thing on the other side of it. She knew this the way she knew the number of stones in the tower's spiral stair, the way she knew which of the 7 narrow windows caught the moon first, not as fact, but as bone. 1,206 stones. The third window. Things a person learned only by having nowhere else to put their attention for a very long time. So, when the great iron lock on the tower door began to turn, groaning, shrieking, shedding age and red flakes of rust onto the floor, Wren did not run, because there was nowhere in the world she had ever been able to run to. She simply rose from the cold sill, where she had been sitting, and watched the door she had given up believing in swing slowly inward. Light came first. Real daylight, thick and gold and impossibly bright, after so long, and it fell across the flagstones like something poured. Then the smell of the outside world came with it. Cut grass, horses, iron, rain on stone, somewhere far off. And her chest ached so suddenly and so hard that she pressed a hand flat against it, and then the man. He filled the doorway the way weather fills a sky. Broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, a heavy traveling cloak thrown back off one arm to free the hand that rested, ready, always ready, on the pommel of a blade. He was not looking at her. He was looking up, past her, at the ruined ceiling and the dust turning in the light and the long dead hearth. His gray eyes narrowed with the wariness of a man who had kicked open a great many doors in his life and learned to distrust every one of them. Behind him, men in the dark green of some royal guard crowded the stair, and their torches were suddenly foolish and orange against the daylight he'd let in. One of them was speaking, low and urgent.
Your Majesty, the seals.
Nothing has broken the seals since the founding. Your Majesty, wait. He did not wait. Kings Wren would learn, rarely did. He stepped over the threshold no living soul had crossed, and the boards took his weight with a sound like a held breath let go, and something in the room, something in her, shifted and settled and recognized, the way a key recognizes the one lock in all the world it was cut for. His head came down, his eyes found her. And Wren, who had not spoken aloud to another human being in longer than she could hold in her mind, who did not know her own age or her own mother's face or why the world had folded her away in a stone tower and forgotten to come back, Wren looked up at the most dangerous man ever to darken that doorway and heard her own voice, cracked and quiet and certain, say a name she had never been taught, Kaelin. The word dropped into the silence, like a stone into a well. Every torch behind him seemed to gutter at once. The guards went rigid. The nearest one, a young man with a scar through his eyebrow, made a small, strangled sound and reached for a weapon he had no idea how to use against a thing like this. Because no one used that name. Wren would understand this only later, that the king's given name was a buried thing, a thing spoken by his dead mother, and perhaps 3 people still living. A thing that had not been said aloud in open air since before the mountain campaigns. To the realm he was the king, the Alpha, his Majesty, the Iron of Halvern. Kaelin was a boy who no longer existed, a name from before the crown and the blood and the long war. And a forgotten girl, in a sealed tower, had just said it to his face, like she was greeting an old friend. The king went very still. Not the stillness of a man startled, the stillness of a predator that is heard, in a quiet wood, a sound that should not be there. His hand was still on his sword. Our gray eyes, which had cut down warlords and outlasted councils, and never once in living memory shown fear, moved over her face slowly, searching it, and something passed behind them that she had no name for. "What did you say?" he said. It was not a question. His voice was low and rough, and it filled the room the way his body had filled the door. Wren's own courage, whatever thin thread of it had produced the name, ran out all at once. She took a step back, and her heel found the cold sill, and there was nowhere further to go. I don't know," she whispered, and it was the truest thing she owned. I don't know how I know it. I've always known it. Since before I can remember anything. Her hands had started to shake. I'm sorry. I don't even know what I am. The scar-browed guard found his voice. Sire, it's a trick. A ward? Something left in the stones to unmake you. We should burn it. We should. Be quiet, Perrin, the king said, without turning, and the man shut his mouth so fast his teeth clicked. For a long moment, the king simply looked at her, and Ren looked back, because she found she could not stop. She was aware distantly of how she must appear to him, barefoot, pale as a thing kept from sun, her dark hair long past her waist, and her dress a shapeless gray shift gone soft and colorless with age. A ghost, a specter. An old rumor that had turned out to be a thin, frightened girl who knew too much. And she was aware, less distantly, of the strangest thing of all, that some knot inside her, a knot she had lived with so long, she'd stopped feeling it as pain, had the instant he crossed the threshold, begun, very slightly, to loosen. How long? The king said at last, and his voice had changed, quieter. How long have you been in this tower? Ren's throat closed. She looked at the 1,206 stones in the third window and the dead hearth. I don't know, she said. A long time. Longer than I can hold in my head. I think a very long time, she swallowed. You're the first door that's ever opened. Something crossed his face then that she would spend a long time trying to name and would only much later understand was grief, not for her, not yet, but recognition of a thing he knew from the inside. The look of one prisoner meeting another. He took his hand off his sword. Perrin, he said, clear the stair. No one speaks of this. No one. He did not look away from her as he said it. And someone find this girl a pair of shoes. They gave her the shoes, but they did not at first give her anything else. Not a name for the place they took her to, not an explanation, not a single honest answer to any of the dozen questions that fought in her throat and mostly died there unspoken. Ren had forgotten in her long years of stone how to ask for things. You did not ask the walls for anything. The walls did not have it to give. So she went where they steered her, down and down the spiral she had climbed, only in her imagination, out through a base of the tower she had never seen, and into a world so large and loud and full that she had to stop twice and put her hand against something solid or be sick. The tower, it turned out, stood at the dead center of a great walled fortress. A keep of pale stone with banners the color of deep forest snapping from every height, courtyards full of horses and smoke, and the ring of a smithy, more people in one glance than Ren had ever imagined existing at once. They all stopped what they were doing when the king strode past with his silent guard and the strange barefoot now-shod girl in the shapeless gray shift, and they all looked, and Ren felt every look like a hand laid on her skin. She learned the name of the place from a passing shout. Halvern, the king's seat, the heart of the realm. She learned nothing else that first day, because the king put her in a room, a real room, with a real bed and a real window, with real glass in it, and a fire someone lit and would not meet her eyes while lighting, and then a woman came. She was old, or old-ish, with iron gray hair, scraped back hard from a sharp brown face and hands stained at the fingertips with a dozen colors of a dozen ground things. She came in without knocking, set down a heavy basket, looked Ren up and down once with eyes like a hawk, deciding whether a thing was food, and said, "Well, you're not dead. Then that's already more interesting than they told me." Ren started. "Andrea," the woman said. "I keep the physic rooms here. Herbs, bones, birthings, the occasional poisoning. Someone has to, and everyone else in this pile of stone faints at blood." She began unpacking the basket. Bread, still warm, a wedge of hard yellow cheese, a cloth bundle that smelled of something green and sharp. "The king says you've been in that tower. He didn't say how long." He looked like a man who didn't want to say how long, She glanced up. How long, girl? And because Andrea asked it plainly, the way you'd ask anything, Ren found she could answer. I don't know, she said. I don't have a... I don't remember going in. I only ever remember being there. Her voice wobbled and she hated it. There was food. It just appeared on the sill. Every morning, I never saw who. The seasons changed through the window. I counted them for a while, and then I lost the count, and it didn't seem to matter. She looked at her own hands. I think I forgot how to want anything. Is that possible? To forget how to want? Andrea had gone very still over the bread. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its briskness. Yes, she said quietly. That's possible. I've seen it in people who've been kept. The word landed strangely. Kept. Not lost. Not forgotten. Kept. Eat, Andrea said, before Ren could catch the thread of it and push the bread into her hands. Whatever you are, you're a body first, and that body's half a ghost. Eat and sleep if you can, and tomorrow we'll see what's what. Ren ate. It was the first food in her memory that she had watched a human hand set down in front of her, and she wept a little over it, quietly. And Andrea pretended not to see, which was its own kind of kindness. There's a thing I don't understand, Ren said when the bread was gone and her voice was steadier. The king, when he opened the door, he looked at me like I was a wound he'd found on his own body. Not surprise. Not fear, though his men were afraid enough for all of them. She searched for the shape of it. Like he already knew me. And I said his name, his real name, the one everyone flinched at, and I don't know how I knew it. I've never known anything. I've never had a single thing to know. She looked up. Do people do that? Recognize each other before they've met? Andrea was quiet a moment. She had a way of going quiet that was different from not answering, a way that meant she was choosing which of several true things to say. Sometimes, she said at last. Not often. And not the way you mean it, I don't think. Sometimes two people meet, and it's as though a debt neither of them knew about comes suddenly due. She rose, gathering her empty basket. I don't know what you are, girl. I've salved a great many hurts in this keep, and delivered a great many secrets along with the babies, and I have never once seen a thing like you walk out of that tower. But I'll tell you what I do know, for what it's worth to a body that's forgotten how to want. She paused at the door. You're the first thing in a year that's made the king look like he might live. That makes you either the luckiest soul in Halvern or the most hunted. Sleep while you can't tell which. And she was gone, and the fire settled, and Ren sat with a strange new weight of having been spoken to like a person and not a rumor. That night she could not sleep in the too-soft bed, so she sat at the window with the real glass and looked out at the tower she'd been pulled from, a black finger against the stars, its single high window dark now that she was no longer in it to catch the moon. And she thought about the name that had come out of her mouth. Kylan. She turned it over and over. It fit her mouth like something worn smooth by handling, though she had never handled it, never heard it, never been taught a single word in that stone room where no one ever came. And yet the moment the king had stepped over the threshold, it had been there, whole and certain, as if it had been waiting in her all along for the door to open so it could get out. Why did she know his name? Why had the knot in her chest loosened when he crossed the sill? And why, now that he was 3 courtyards away behind 100 walls, had it drawn tight again, tight enough that she could feel it like a hand closed around something soft? She did not have answers. She had only the questions and the dark tower and the enormous frightening world and the strange new fact of being seen. The knock came at dawn. Not Andrea's non-knock, a real one, sharp, official. Ren opened the door to a guardsman she didn't know, his face carefully blank, and behind him the scar-browed one from the tower stair. Perrin, looking at her the way a man looks at a snake he's been ordered not to kill. You're summoned, the first guard said, by the king. Now, The king's council chamber was a long, cold, high-ceilinged room, and it was full of men who hated her before she had said a single word. Wren felt it the moment the guards walked her in. A dozen faces turning, a dozen conversations dying. The particular quality of a silence that has just been talking about you. They sat along a great dark table, these men, in furs and heavy chains of office, and they looked at the barefoot ghost from the tower, now scrubbed and dressed in a plain borrowed gown, and not one of them looked as if they thought she should be alive. At the head of the table sat the king, in the tower doorway. He had been a shape of weather and daylight. Here, on his own ground, he was something colder and more contained, sitting very straight in a chair that was not quite a throne, but wanted to be. One long-fingered hand, flat on the table, the gray eyes, hooded and unreadable. He wore no crown. He did not need one. The room bent toward him the way a field bends toward the sun, and he seemed to feel the weight of that and hold still under it, like a man carrying something that must not be dropped. But Wren was close to him now, closer than she had been since the tower, and the knot in her chest had loosened again the instant she entered the room, and freed by even that little slack, some clearer sense in her woke, and she saw what the furs and the stillness were built to hide. He was exhausted, not tired the way a man is tired at the end of a long day. Exhausted the way stone is worn. From underneath, from the inside, a deep structural fatigue that had carved shadows like bruises beneath his eyes and hollowed the flesh under his cheekbones, and put a fine constant tremor in the hand that lay too flat and too deliberate on the table. He was a young man, wearing an old man's ruin. He was, she thought, with a strange lurch, being eaten by something. "This is the creature from the tower," said one of the councilmen, a heavy, red-faced man, with a voice like a door dragging. "Sire, I must object again, and in the strongest." "You've objected, Lord Varick," the king said loudly and at length. "Sit down." Varick sat, but his small eyes stayed on Wren, hot with something between fear and appetite. The king looked at her. "You said a name," he said. No preamble. "In the tower. You said you didn't know how you knew it." "I don't, Your Majesty." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Say it again." The room stiffened. She understood dimly that this was a test, that he had brought her before these men who wanted her dead precisely so that they would witness whatever she was, and that saying the name wrong or refusing to say it might be the last thing she did. But she also understood, with the strange, sure knowing that had lived in her all along, that lying to him was not a thing she was able to do. "Kaelin," she said, and this time she felt it happen. As the name left her, the loosened knot in her chest gave a warm pulse, outward, toward him, like a coal breezed on, and across the table the king's eyes drifted, just slightly, half closing, his rigid shoulders easing down a bare fraction, the constant tremor in his hand going briefly, blessedly still. It lasted no more than a breath. Then he caught it, hauled himself back, and his eyes snapped open hard, and full of something that might have been hope and might have been terror. The councilmen hadn't seen the pulse. But they'd seen him, seen the iron of Halvern soften for a heartbeat in a room full of his enemies, and a low sound of consternation moved down the table. "What did you do?" the king said, very quietly, just to her. "I don't know," Wren whispered. Panic climbed her throat. "I didn't do anything. I only said it. I don't. Please. I don't know what I am, sire." A new voice, smooth and level, from a man who had until now sat silent at the king's right hand. Younger than the others, lean, watchful, with the still competence of someone who managed dangerous things for a living. "Perhaps not here." The king held Wren's eyes a moment longer, then to the room, in a voice that had gone flat and final.
"This council is done for the day."
"Sire," began Varick. "Done." They filed out slowly, resentfully, each of them looking back at her, and Wren stood alone in the emptying cold room, with the exhausted king and his silent, watchful right hand, and felt the knot in her chest, even now, even here, straining toward the man at the head of the table like a plant toward light, and had no idea what it meant or what it wanted. Purse. What saying his name had just cost her. The lean man closed the great doors behind the last councilman. Then he turned and studied Ren with frank open curiosity and said to the king, "Well, that's the third time in a year I've seen you close your eyes, and the other two you were bleeding." He tilted his head. "She doesn't even have to touch you, Halwyn," the king said a warning. But the lean man, Halwyn, only smiled, thin and tired and genuine. And Ren realized with a cold, sliding feeling that whatever was wrong with the king, this man had watched it kill him slowly for a long time, and had just for the first time seen something push back. "Your Majesty," Halwyn said, and now he was looking only at Ren, and his voice had dropped so low it barely carried. "I think you should tell her what happens to you at night. Before someone else does. Before Varric does." The king said nothing, and Ren, watching the most powerful man in the realm fail to answer a simple question about his own nights, felt the last of her relief curdle into dread. They did not tell her that day. That was almost worse. Halwyn the king's beta, Andrea explained later. The second wolf of Halvern, the one who ran the things a king could not be seen to run, took her from the council chamber back to her room, and left her there with a guard at the door and no answers at all. Only that same low warning turning over in her head. "Tell her what happens to you at night." Ren sat on the edge of the too-soft bed and shook. She had, in the tower, feared very little, because nothing ever happened. Long years of the same stones taught you that fear was a thing that needed fuel, and there had been no fuel. Now, the fuel was. She had said a dead name to a living king. She had done something to him, some pulse she couldn't control and didn't understand, in front of a room of men who wanted her burned. And whatever it was, it had made the king look at her, the way a drowning man looks at a rope, which she was beginning to grasp. The most dangerous way a powerless thing can ever be looked at by a powerful one. Because ropes get used, and ropes, when they're done being used, get cut. Andrea came at dusk with more food, and found her like that, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, staring at the black tower through the real glass. "They didn't tell you," Andrea said. It wasn't a question. She set the tray down hard. "Cowards, all of them, the king included, and I'll say it to his face." She lowered herself into the chair by the fire with the care of an old body. "All right. I've had about enough of this keep tiptoeing round its own rot. You want to know what's the matter with him?" Ren's head came up. "You know, I'm the physic. Of course I know. I'm the one who's failed to fix it for a year." Andrea's mouth twisted. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Not because they'd punish you. Because if the wrong ears in this keep learned how close their king is to falling, there are men at that table who'd move on the throne before his body cooled." She fixed Ren with the hawk's stare. "You understand? This isn't a secret to protect his pride. It's a secret keeping him alive." Ren nodded, mute. "The king doesn't sleep," Andrea said. "Not properly. Not through a night. Not for longer than a few stolen minutes at a stretch. And not without." She paused, chose the word, "company." "It's been so since he came back from the northern campaign. Better than a year now." "A year," Ren breathed. "But no one can. No one can." "That's right. A man goes without true sleep for a fortnight and he starts to die. His mind first, then the rest. The king's an alpha, a shifter. The wolf in him has kept the body walking long past where yours or mine would have dropped. But even that runs out." Andrea's voice hardened to cover something underneath it. "Halwyn thinks he has months." "I think Halwyn is being kind to himself." Every night, the king closes his eyes. Something reaches in and drags him back out before rest can touch him. And every night, it costs more than it gave. He is being ground to nothing, girl, in front of a court that mostly can't see it, and partly can't wait for it. The fire popped. Ren's mind was a roar. "But," she said slowly, In the council, when I said the name. His hand stopped shaking, just for a moment, and in the tower, when he first came in, I felt something in me go loose, like a fist opening. Andrea went absolutely still. Say that again, she said in exactly the king's flat, dangerous voice, and Ren understood where he'd learned it. When he's near me, Ren said, something in my chest loosens, and when I said his name in the council, I felt it push toward him. And that's when his hand went still. She was gripping the blanket now. I don't know what it is. I've had the knot, the tightness. As long as I can remember in the tower, it never changed. Since the door opened, it hasn't stopped. It pulls toward him. When I'm closer, it eases. When I'm far, it aches. She looked up, desperate. What is it? What's wrong with me? Andrea did not answer for a long moment. She had risen from the chair without seeming to decide to, and crossed to the window, and was looking out at the black tower. With an expression Ren couldn't read, but it wasn't fear, and it wasn't confusion. It was the face of a woman watching two halves of a broken thing recognize each other across a room. Nothing's wrong with you, Andrea said at last, very quietly, and there was something almost frightened in the gentleness of it. That's the trouble. I think something is very, very right, and I think it is long ages too late, and I think the whole of this keep is about to become extremely dangerous for you. She turned. That name, you know, that pull you feel. Girl, what did they put in that tower? And why did it open for him? Before Ren could speak, a knock came. The sharp, official kind, and both women froze. Andrea opened the door. Halwyn stood in the corridor, and his lean, watchful face was, for the first time, openly grim. The king fell asleep an hour ago, he said, at his desk. For the first time in a year, he slept, and then the nightmare took him, worse than any I've seen, and he woke, shouting a name. His pale eyes moved to Ren, and held her like a pin holds a moth. Your name. Except you never gave him your name. So how, exactly, does the King of Halvern know it? The knot in Ren's chest pulled so hard she nearly gasped. She did not have an answer. She was beginning to be very afraid that when the answer came, it would be the kind you did not survive knowing. They came for her before she had slept. It was the deep, black middle of the night when the knock came. Not Andrea's, not the sharp official rap of a summons, but something in between, urgent and low. Halwyn himself stood in the corridor, a lamp in one hand, and his lean face had lost its watchful composure entirely. Behind it, Ren saw a thing she would not have believed the king's cold beta capable of fear. He won't wake, Halwyn said. Or he wakes, and he isn't there. He looks through us. He said your name twice more, and then he stopped speaking at all. His jaw worked. Andrea's with him, and she's out of ideas, and I have run out of things to try that don't end with a dead king. So I am doing the thing I swore I wouldn't do until I understood it, which is bringing the tower's ghost to my king's bedside and praying I'm not carrying in the very knife that guts him. His pale eyes pinned her. Come, now. And whatever you feel pulling at you, for once, girl, don't fight it. She didn't fight it. She couldn't have. The moment Halwyn spoke of the king, the knot in her chest had drawn so taut it stole her breath, and every step down the dark corridors toward him loosened it by a fraction, so that walking toward the King of Halvern in the dead of night felt, obscenely, like walking toward relief. The king's chambers were vast and dim and smelled of wood smoke and old iron. Weapons on the walls threw long shadows in the lamplight, and in the center of it, on a great dark bed, lay Kalen, thrashing slow and terrible against sheets twisted like ropes, his head thrown back, the cords of his neck standing out, his breath coming in the ragged, tearing gulps of a man being held under water. Andrea knelt over him with a wet cloth and a face gone gray. He's burning, she said without looking up. Whatever's got him won't let go, and won't let him surface. If this is the night, it takes him. It's taking him. Ren crossed the room. Before she decided to, the pull had become the only thing in the world. She sank onto the edge of the bed, and the instant her weight settled beside him, the king went still, not the stillness of death, the stillness of a struck bell finding its silence, and his ragged breathing caught, and eased, and slowly deepened into something that had not been in it a moment before. Rest, gods, Halwyn whispered, but it wasn't finished. His brow still furrowed, his hand still fisted in the sheet. Wherever he was, he had not yet been let go. Without knowing why, moving on the same certainty that had put his name in her mouth, Ren reached out and laid her hand over that clenched fist. His fingers turned and closed around hers. Hard, desperate, a drowning grip. And the knot in her chest unspooled all at once, warm and golden and right, pouring outward down her arm into his hand, and the last of the terror went out of the king's face, and the deep lines around his eyes smoothed, and Kaelin of Helvern the Iron sank into sleep, like a stone into still water, and did not stir again. The room was utterly silent. The fire ticked. "He's sleeping," Andrea said, in the tone of a woman describing something she does not believe. She pressed 2 fingers to his throat, watched his chest rise and fall, and slowly sat back on her heels. "He's sleeping." Halwyn came to the foot of the bed and stared down at his king, and at the barefoot girl whose hand the king gripped like a lifeline in his sleep, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "Don't move," he said finally, very quietly. "Whatever you do, don't take your hand away. Don't wake him, not for anything." He dragged a chair to the wall and sat in it, plainly intending to stay the night. "I have watched that man fight the whole world, and lose only to the inside of his own skull. If sitting in a chair until dawn is the price of one night's rest for him, I'll sit in it till I rot." So Ren sat, the king's hand locked around hers, and did not move. The hours crawled. Her arm went numb, then past numb. Her back ached. But she watched his face in the firelight, the shadows under his eyes fading by slow degrees, the hollows in his cheeks filling, a faint color returning to skin that had been gray as ash, and something in her chest that had nothing to do with the knot ached in an entirely new way. She had been kept in a tower for longer than she could count, and never once been needed, and now the most powerful man in the realm was holding her hand in his sleep like she was the only solid thing left in the world. Once, deep in the small hours, his brow began to furrow again, some current of the old flood reaching for him, even now, and without thinking, Ren leaned close and spoke to him, low, the way she'd once spoken to no one at all through 100 silent nights of stone. "You're all right," she murmured. "I've got your hand. Nothing's pulling you anywhere. I can't reach." She didn't know if he heard her. But the furrows smoothed and his grip eased, from desperate to merely holding, and she felt the knot in her chest answer it, a warmth passing out of her and into him as simply as breath. It frightened her, how simple it was. Whatever this was, it did not feel like magic being worked on her. It felt like coming into her own use for the first time, like a key that had spent its whole existence in a drawer finally turned. She thought about that word Andrea had used, kept. She had assumed it meant imprisoned, but a thing could be kept the way you kept a sword sharp, or a fire banked, or a promise, kept for something. She looked down at the sleeping king's hand, wrapped around hers, and felt, under all her fear, the smallest, strangest flicker of something she had no practice naming. Not hope, exactly. The place where hope would go, if she ever let it. Toward dawn, Halwyn spoke into the dark, so low she almost missed it. "A year," he said. "A year I've watched for anything, any herb, any prayer, any woman, any wine, strong enough to drop him, nothing held." He'd close his eyes, and something would drag him back inside a minute. He looked at their joined hands. "You did in one breath what a kingdom of healers couldn't do in a year. And you fell out of a tower no one has opened since the founding," knowing his name. His pale eyes lifted to hers. You understand why some men will want to worship you, and why more will want you dead. Ren understood. She was beginning to understand a great many things. She wished she didn't. The king slept on, his hand warm around hers, and for the first time in her memory, Ren was afraid not of the walls, but of the world, and could not tell, in the dark, whether the thing tightening in her chest was the pull, or something she had no name for yet, something far more dangerous to a forgotten girl than any council of lord. He woke at full dawn, and the first thing King Kalin of Halvern did with a year's stolen rest returned to him was nearly break her wrist. It was instinct, not cruelty, a warrior surfacing from deep sleep to find a hand in his, seizing it before thought caught up. His eyes flew open, gray and suddenly clear, in a way Ren had not seen them, clearer than the tower, clearer than the council, and for one raw, unguarded moment, he simply looked at her, at the girl sitting numb-armed on the edge of his bed, with the morning light on her face, and something crossed his features that was neither king nor iron. Then memory arrived and the walls came down, and he let go of her hand as if it had burned him. "You slept," Halwyn said from his chair. Before the king could speak, he looked 10 years older and entirely satisfied. 6 hours! Perhaps 7, through the night. No thrashing, no shouting. He rose stiff. "Sire, I have watched you every night for a year, and I have never once seen your face do what it did in the dark. So before you order the room cleared, and lock this, behind that iron composure of yours, she stays. That is not a request from your beta. It is the only medical fact I possess." The king sat up slowly against the headboard. He pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes, and Ren watched his shoulders, broad, rigid, always braced. Drop a fraction, the way a man's do when he is too rested to hold his guard as high. When he lowered his hands, he was looking at her again, and this time he held it. "You have questions," he said. His voice was rough with sleep, and something under it. "Ask them. I owe you at least that. You gave me a night I stopped believing I'd have again." The questions crowded up and jammed. She asked the smallest one, "What's wrong with you?" Andrea, at the window, made a small sound. But the king only huffed something that was almost a laugh. "Dark and tired. Direct," he said. "Good. Everyone here talks around it." He looked at his own hands. "A year ago I put down a rising in the north, a pack called the Greywater, and their alpha, a man named Torvald, who thought the crown had left the border villages to rot and decided to take them for himself. He was not entirely wrong about the rot. That did not make his answer less bloody. His jaw tightened. I offered terms 3 times. He wanted war, so there was war. And at the end of it, in the ruin of his hall, his mother, a hedge witch, old, half-mad with grief, took my face in her hands before my men could stop her and put something in me." He met Ren's eyes. "She said, every night, the drowned will pull you down. You will never again sleep without their hands on you." A pause. I laughed at her. "I don't laugh now." "The drowned," Ren repeated. A cold finger traced her spine. "What does that mean?" "It means," the king said, "that when I close my eyes I am in a black flood. Cold water, no bottom, no shore, and hands, hundreds of hands, closing on me from below and pulling every night. I fight to the surface, and something drags me under again, and I wake before I drown only because the wolf won't let me die." His voice had gone very flat, the way people's do around the worst things. "Last night was the first time in a year I reached the surface and stayed, broke through into open air. I have not breathed in that place for a year." He looked at her hand, lying now in her own lap. "You pulled me up." The room was quiet. Andrea had turned fully from the window. "The Greywater witch," she said slowly. "I know the strain of curse. It's old border magic. Blood and grief and salt. But you're right, Halwyn. It shouldn't hold like this. A curse that, strong, burns its caster hollow. She'd not have survived casting it, and if she didn't survive, It should have frayed within the season. She frowned deeply. For it to still have teeth a year on, something is feeding it. And I can't, for the life of me, see what. Then find out, the king said, because I would like to die of a sword like an honest man, and not of a bad dream like a coward. He said it lightly. No one laughed. He looked at Wren again, and his voice changed, lost its edge, went quieter, careful, almost formal. Which brings me to you. I will not pretend I understand what you are. A girl who does not age in a sealed tower. A name in your mouth that 3 living people know. And a pull, Holland tells me you called it. A thing in your chest that eases near me. His gray eyes searched her face. I felt it too last night. When you took my hand, something in me that has been screaming for a year went quiet. A muscle moved in his jaw. I do not like needing things. I have spent my life making certain I need nothing. And now, it seems, I need you, a stranger from a tower, to survive the night, and I like it about as much as I would like a blade at my back. I don't understand it any better than you do, Wren said. I've had the pull as long as I can remember. In the tower, it never changed. Since you opened that door, it hasn't stopped, and it hurts when you're far, and eases when you're near, and I don't know why, and I would give a great deal to know. Her voice cracked. You, at least, know what's killing you. I don't even know what I am. Something in the king's face shifted at that recognition. The same look he'd worn in the tower doorway, one prisoner seeing another. Then we're 2 people who don't know what's been done to them, he said. That at least I can work with. He looked at Halwyn. She stays in the keep. Near quarters. The empty rooms off the east gallery, close enough to reach me at night. His mouth thinned. And this arrangement does not leave the 4 people in this room. Not a servant, not a lord, not a whisper. If Varric learns the King of Halvern sleeps only with the tower girl's hand in his, he will have a knife in my ribs, and a story about witchcraft in every mouth in the realm by the next moon. His eyes came back to her, and there was an apology buried very deep in them. You will be a secret, Wren. I'm sorry for it. It's the only shape of this that keeps you breathing. It was the first time he had said her name. She felt it land somewhere behind the knot, warm and unwelcome, and impossible to unfeel, and she looked down, so he wouldn't see whatever her face was doing. A practical arrangement, she said, borrowing his own cold word, trying it on. Yes, the king said, but he said it too slowly, and neither of them quite believed it. And across the room Andrea and Halwyn exchanged a single glance that said, more clearly than any words, that the 2 people at the center of this had no idea yet how much trouble they were in. It became a rhythm, the way even the strangest things do. By day, their lives did not touch. The king ruled, held his cold council, rode out to his fields and his garrisons, was the iron of Halvern in furs and hard looks, and no one watching him would have guessed he passed his nights with his hand in the hand of a girl who'd fallen out of a forbidden tower. By day, Wren kept to the East Gallery rooms, or to Andrea's physic chambers, where the old woman put her to work, grinding herbs and sorting bones, and being, for the first time in her existence, useful, which turned out to be a thing so novel, Wren cried over a bowl of dried yarrow the first afternoon. And by night, after the keep had gone dark and quiet, a silent guard walked her up to the king's chambers, and she lay down on the narrow bed they'd set at right angles to his great one, close enough to reach, and she took his hand across the small, cold gap between them, and the drown did not pull him under, and the King of Halvern slept. The first nights, they did not speak at all. He was a locked door. She was a girl who'd spent a lifetime learning not to knock. They lay in the dark, hands joined over the gap, 2 strangers performing a nightly miracle in complete silence, and Wren stared at the ceiling and listened to his breathing even out, and thought she might go mad from all the things unsaid. It was the candle that broke it. On the 4th night, she came up to find a fresh candle burning on the little table by her narrow bed, where there had been none before, and the fire already banked warm, where before she'd found the room cold. She looked at it, then at the king, already lying rigid and pretending to read a report he plainly wasn't reading. "Thank you for the candle," she said. "There's no candle," said the king to his report, "the one that appeared by my bed." "That someone lit servants," he said. "You told me no servant sets foot in this room after dark." There was a silence. The king turned a page he hadn't read. "Go to sleep, Wren," he said. But the tips of his ears had gone faintly red in the firelight, and Wren lay down and smiled at the ceiling in the dark, and felt something in the room shift by a degree. After that she talked. Not about anything that mattered. She didn't have anything that mattered. That was the trouble. She had a locked-away life, and a name, and a pull. So she talked about the keep instead, about the things she was learning in it, like a child learns a world, about Andrea's foul-tasting tonics, and the stable cat who had adopted her, and the way the third courtyard smelled of bread at dawn, about the astonishing endless novelty of weather, which she had only ever watched through one high window and could now walk out into. She talked into the dark, not knowing if he listened, until his breathing deepened, and she knew he'd gone under, and then she talked a little longer, just to fill the room. "And one morning," he said, without preamble, buttoning his jacket by the window, "the cat, gray, torn ear. Does it still come to the physic door?" Wren sat up. "You were asleep. I was falling asleep. There's a difference." He didn't turn around, but she could hear something under the words. "Does it every morning," she said. "It's decided I belong to it. It has taste." "Then," the king said to the glass, and left before she could find her breath, and Wren sat in the tangled sheets of the narrow bed, with her heart doing something complicated, and knew she was in trouble. The trouble deepened by inches after that, small things. A book left on her table, a real book, the first she'd ever held, full of maps of a realm she was only beginning to believe was real, with no note and no explanation, and the king's flat denial when she thanked him, the fire always warm. A second candle, the gradual thaw of a man who did not know how to be kind, and so was kind, badly, sideways, in the dark, where he could pretend he wasn't. And then, the ninth night, he laughed. She'd been telling him about her first and only disaster in Andrea's chambers, how she'd confused 2 jars and dosed a guardsman meant for a stomach tonic with something that turned his tongue a vivid and lasting blue, and how the man had gone about the keep for 3 days, convinced he'd been poisoned by the ghost of the tower, and somewhere in the middle of it, in the dark, she heard it. A rough, rusty, disbelieving sound, like a hinge that hadn't moved in years. The king of Halvern, laughing. Wren stopped talking. She was afraid to breathe on it. "Blue," the king said, in the dark, still shaking with it. "You turned a man's tongue blue, for a week," Wren admitted. "Andrea nearly turned mine the same color when she found out." He laughed again, quieter, and then it faded into a silence that was warm instead of cold. And after a while he said, in a different voice entirely, one she'd never heard from him, "I haven't done that in a long time." Turned a man blue. Laughed a pause. His hand in hers tightened. Not the drowning grip of the first night, something gentler, deliberate. "Thank you for the talking. I didn't think I wanted it. I find I—" He stopped the iron of Halvern out of words. "Go to sleep, Wren," he said roughly, and she did. But her hand stayed warm in his all night, and she woke before dawn to find that at some point in the dark he had turned toward her, his hard face gone soft and young and unguarded in sleep, close enough that she could count the lashes she'd noticed in the tower a lifetime ago. She should have moved. She didn't. She lay in the gray light and looked at the sleeping king and felt the knot in her chest, and understood, finally and completely, and with a kind of falling dread, that it had stopped being only the pull. That, somewhere, in the candles, and the cat, and the rusty laugh, she had begun to want this man, not because something in her chest compelled her to, but because she, simply, dangerously, did. And that was when Hallwyn's warning came back to her. cold as the tower stones. Some will want to worship you, and more will want you dead. She was a secret. A secret the whole keep could feel, the shape of even if it couldn't see it, because the king of Halvern had begun, quietly, to look rested, and men like Varric had begun, quietly, to notice and to wonder what had changed. Wren pulled her hand gently from the sleeping kings and sat up in the cold dawn, and knew that the warm thing growing between them in the dark was also, now, the most dangerous thing in Halvern, and that sooner or later someone was going to come looking for it. Down in the third courtyard, though she could not have known it yet, someone already had. The someone in the courtyard was a girl of perhaps 10, and she was watching the tower. Wren found her there the next morning, a small solemn thing in a scullery smock, standing very still in the third courtyard, with her face turned up to the black finger of stone, and something about the stillness stopped Wren in her track. She knew that stillness. She'd worn it a very long time. "You shouldn't look at it too long," the girl said, without turning around. "That's what my gran says. She says the tower keeps what it's given and it's always hungry for more." Now she did turn, and her eyes were wide and unafraid in the way of children, who have decided a frightening thing is simply true. "You came out of it. Everyone says you're the ghost." "I'm not a ghost," Wren said. "I don't think. My gran says the tower's older than the keep. She says they built the keep around it, to hold it shut, and the first king put something inside it that the realm needed gone." The girl considered Wren frankly. "You don't look like something the realm needed gone. You look sad." And with the sudden mercy of children, she lost interest, and ran off toward the kitchens, leaving Wren alone in the courtyard, with a cold new thread pulling loose in her mind. They built the keep around it. The first king put something inside, not someone, something. She carried it to Andrea, who went still over her mortar, in exactly the way she had the night of the loosening knot. "Old wives talk," the physic said too quickly. Then, slower, "Or not. This keep is full of things no one will say plainly, and I have lived here 40 years and never once been told what that tower was for." She set the pestle down. "There'll be records, the founding rolls, kept in the archive under the West Hall, and Varric holds the only key, which means we won't be asking Varric." Her hawk's eyes found Wren's. "But the king could open any door in Halvern, if he wanted to know badly enough." "He's afraid to know," Wren said, understanding it as she said it. "About the tower. He opened the door on a whim, and found me, and he hasn't asked one real question about it since. He asks about the cat." She pressed her hand to her chest, to the knot. He'd rather have the mystery than the answer, because the answer might take away the one thing letting him sleep. Andrea looked at her for a long moment. "You've learned to read him," she said quietly. "That's either the best thing that's happened to that man in a year, or the worst thing that's happened to you." "I've not decided which." That night, Wren decided to ask him herself. But the king was not in a mood to be asked things. He came to the chamber late and grim, a fresh tension in the set of his shoulders that even the nearness of her couldn't ease. And when she said, carefully, "The tower, do you never wonder what was?" he cut her off with a flat "no," and lay down fully clothed and rigid and did not take her hand. The gap between the beds felt suddenly very wide. Wren lay in the dark and listened to him not sleep, listened to the ragged edge creep back into his breathing as the hour wore on and the drowned began, without her hand, to reach for him. She could hear it happening, the small catches, the low sounds, the sheets shifting as his body fought. He was doing it on purpose. Refusing her hand, refusing the comfort, punishing himself for something, and she didn't know what until he said, into the black in a voice scraped raw, "Varric came to me today, privately," he said. "The men are talking. They say the king has a witch, a thing he keeps. That's why he's changed. He didn't know how near the truth he was, and it doesn't matter. He was threatening me, Wren, in the polished way of his kind, and do you know what I felt?" A bitter pause. Relief. That if it came to it, I could put you back in the tower and be safe again. I stood there and felt relief at the thought of sealing you back into that stone, and I hated myself so much I could not breathe. His voice broke on the last of it. You gave me sleep, and I stood there and considered burying you alive to keep my crown quiet. That is what I am. That is the man you're holding hands with, in the dark. The silence rang. Wren got up. She crossed the cold gap between the beds, a thing she had never once done, and she sat on the edge of his great bed, close, and in the firelight. His eyes were open and wet and furious with himself. You considered it, she said. And you didn't do it. And you told me, which you didn't have to. She reached out and took his hand off the sheet, both of hers wrapped around his fist, and felt the knot pour warm down her arm, and felt him shudder as the drowned let go. I spent my whole life being something the world sealed away and forgot. If you were going to do it, you'd have done it, and never said a word, the way they did. You're not them, Kaelin. His name, again, deliberate, this time, laid down between them like a card. You're the one who opened the door. He looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, as if it cost him more than any battle ever had, he lifted his free hand and touched her face, just his fingertips, along her jaw, the barest thing, and Wren stopped breathing entirely. I don't know how to want something and not destroy it, he said very low. I've never once managed it. Then we'll both be bad at this, Wren whispered. I don't know how to want anything at all. His thumb moved across her cheekbone. The whole world narrowed to that inch of contact, to the heat of him, to the terrible tenderness on the face of a man built for war, and the pull in her chest was there, but it was drowned now, wholly outmatched by a wanting that was entirely her own, and had nothing to do with any curse or knot or tower. He drew her down, not a kiss, not yet, just her head to his chest, her hand still locked in his arm coming around her at last, like a thing surrendered. She lay against the King of Halvern, and felt his heart slam and slow, and felt him sink towards sleep with her whole weight held against him, like an anchor. Stay on this side of the gap, he murmured, half under already. I'm tired of the gap. All right, she breathed. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay in the circle of his arm in the firelight, and let herself, for the first time in her existence, simply have something, and did not yet know that the having was the exact thing that would drag her, before the next night was through, down into the black water after him. She woke, surrounded by drowning. There was no gray dawn, no fire, no chamber. There was only cold black water in every direction, no surface, no floor, a lightless flood that filled her mouth and nose and pressed the breath from her chest and hands. Hundreds of hands closing out of the dark, pale and swollen and gentle in the worst possible way, wrapping her ankles and wrists and throat and pulling her down, down, down. I'm in it, she understood. With a horror so complete it was almost calm, I fell asleep against him, and I'm in the water. This is where he goes every night. This is the drowned. She did not fight the hands. A lifetime of stone had taught her that thrashing against what holds you only wears you out, and something deeper than thought told her the hands were not the enemy. They were only grief, only the dead, only sorrow-given fingers. She let them pull, and she looked through the black. For him. She found him below her, where the water was coldest. The king knelt on nothing at the bottom of the flood, and he was not fighting either. That was the terror of it. The Iron of Halvern, who fought everything, knelt still and open-armed in the drowning dark, and let the hands cover him, let them fill his mouth, let them drag him down, his gray eyes fixed on something in the deeper black, with an expression not of fear, but of agreement. He was not being pulled under, he was going willingly. He had been going willingly every night for a year. Kaelin, her voice made no sound in the water. She swam down against the current of grasping hands, and they parted for her. They let her through, as if she were the one thing the flood had no claim on, and she reached him and took his face in her hands, the way she realized with a lurch the witch had taken his a year ago. "Kaelin, look at me, look at me." He looked, and in his eyes she saw it, the thing feeding the curse. The thing Andra couldn't find. The reason old border magic still had teeth a year on when it should have frayed to nothing. It wasn't the witch's power keeping him under, it was his. "I know why it won't break," Ren said, and now her voice worked. "Here in the deep, where only truth could be spoken, she cursed you to be pulled down by the drowned. But a curse like that burns out," Andrea said so, "unless something feeds it. And you've been feeding it. Every night. You come down here and you let them take you because..." She stared at him and the last of it fell into place with a click like an iron lock. "Because you think you deserve to drown." The water stilled. Around them, the hands loosened, just slightly, and the pale, drowned faces turned, hundreds of them. And Ren saw at last who they were. Border villagers. Greywater fighters. Torvald's people, and the king's own. The fallen of a war that a better world would never have needed. And nearest of all, drifting close, a young woman with riverweed in her hair and a child's carved wooden horse still clutched in one waterlogged hand, her face soft with a terrible forgiveness that Ren understood at once was the worst thing in the whole flood. "Marith," the king said, and the name came out of him broken. "The crossing." We moved to close the northern crossing and cut off Torvald's retreat, and the ferry was still out on the water. There were families still aboard it, fleeing the fighting, and I gave the order to take the crossing, and I did not know, I swear, before every god I did not know they were still out there. His face twisted. 40 souls. The river had them before anyone understood, and by the time we did, it was too late to call it back. I gave the order. They were lost, and I gave the order. "You didn't know," Ren said. "A better king would have known," he roared, and the water shook with it. "That's what she says. Every night, a better king would have known. A better king would have looked. Their blood is in the water and the water is yours." His arms opened wider, offering himself to the flood. "And she's right, Ren, so I come down. Every night, I come down and I let them have their due. Because it is owed, and I will keep coming down until it's paid, even if it kills me, especially if it kills me." "That's not her voice," Ren said. He stopped. "Marith isn't saying it." Ren turned the drowned woman's soft, forgiving face toward him with the gentlest touch. "Look at her. She's not accusing you. She's not saying any of it. You are. The curse never had the strength to hold you, so it found the strongest thing in you and used its mouth. It's been speaking in your own voice for a year, Kaelin, telling you what you already believed, and you've been calling it justice." Her own eyes flooded and the tears vanished into the black water. "It's not justice. It's just grief, with your face on it." The drowned woman Marith drifted close. She lifted the small wooden horse, a toy, a child's toy, saved from the fire and the flood, and carried down all this way. And she pressed it, water-soft and impossibly gentle, into the king's open hand, and she shook her head slowly. "No. Not this blood is on your hands. Just no. Let it go." Her drowned mouth shaped, without sound. "We are so tired of being your punishment. Let us rest. Let yourself." The king made a sound Ren had no name for. "I don't know how," he wept. "I've held them a year. If I put them down, what am I? A man who cost 40 innocents their lives, and simply walked away?" "No," Ren said. And here in the deep, the truest thing she owned rose up in her at last, the thing a lifetime of being sealed away and forgotten had carved into her bones. A man who carries them the right way. "Kaelin, I was put in a stone tower and forgotten by the whole world, and I believed it was because I was a thing that deserved to be sealed away, and that if I'd been worth keeping, someone would have come. I made my own cage out of that, and I lived in it long after the door was the only thing left holding me." She gripped his face. It was a lie. I didn't deserve the tower, and you don't deserve the flood. Grieving them isn't the same as drowning for them. You're allowed to carry Marith and still come up for air. You're allowed to put this down and still live. For a long, suspended moment, the black water held its breath. Then the king of Halvern closed his fingers around the small wooden horse and pressed it to his chest and bowed his head and said to Marith, to all 40 of them, to the whole cold flood of his year-long grief, I'm sorry. I couldn't save you. I would give my life to have that fairy back, and I can't, and I'm sorry, and his voice cracked to nothing. I have to stop drowning now, I have to, forgive me for living. And the drowned, one by one, forgave him. The hands opened. The pale faces softened and turned away and began, gently, to rise, not pulling him down now but drifting up past him toward a light wren. Hadn't known was there a pale surface impossibly far above. And Marith rose last, her riverweed hair streaming, the ghost of a smile on her drowned face, until she too dissolved into the brightening water and was gone. And the flood, with nothing left to feed it, began to fail. The king seized Wren's hand. Together they kicked upward through, water going warmer and lighter, by the moment, up and up toward the surface that had not existed for a year. And Wren felt the knot in her chest and his grip in her hand, and the whole weight of him rising with her instead of away. And just before they broke through, she heard him say her name, not broken now. Not a nightmare's cry, but like a man reaching for the one solid thing in the world and finding it there. They broke the surface. Wren woke, gasping, in the king's bed, in the gray dawn in his arms. And he woke in the same instant, gray eyes flying open and clear, clear all the way down, a year of drowning simply gone from behind them. For a moment, neither of them could speak. His chest heaved against hers. Her face was wet, and so was his. Then the king of Halvern began, at last, to weep the way he should have wept a year ago. Great, silent, shaking sobs, the whole damned year of it breaking open. And Wren held him through all of it, in the strengthening light, and whispered into his hair the only thing worth saying. I've got you, she said. You came up, you're breathing. I've got you. The curse did not break cleanly, because grief never does. It broke the way ice breaks on a river in spring, not all at once, but in slow, groaning stages. A great crack, and then a long thaw. That first morning, the king slept 3 more hours in the full light of day, easily, dreamlessly, his hand loose in hers. And when he woke, the shadows under his eyes had begun to fade, and did not, over the days that followed, come back. The drowned did not return. Some nights he still surfaced from ordinary bad dreams the way any grieving man does. And on those nights, Wren simply held his hand and talked to him in the dark, until the fire burned low, and it was enough. It was always now enough. But there was still the matter of the tower. It was the king himself who insisted. Once he was strong enough. The man who for weeks had refused to ask a single real question now needed the answer more than she did. You gave me back my life, he said. You said my name before you'd ever laid eyes on me. I have slept a year in the same keep as the mystery of you, and been too much a coward to open one more door. No longer. So, he did the thing Andrea had said he could do. He opened any door in Halvern he pleased, and the door he chose was the archive under the West Hall, and he did it in front of Varric, and he did not give Varric the key back afterward. The founding rolls were old beyond old, brittle and brown, and it took Andrea 3 days to read them, and when she was done, she came to the king's chamber with her face gone, strange and gentle, and sat Wren down before she spoke. You were not put in the tower a lifetime ago, Andrea said. You were put there, at the founding, 300 years past, before the keep. The tower is older than Halvern, and Halvern was built to hold it shut, exactly as the child's grand said. She drew a breath. The first Alpha King of this line made a pact, in the founding war, with an old power of the deep places. the kind that speaks in bonds and blood. He asked for the strength to hold the realm. And the price of that strength was a keeper, a living soul, bound to the king's own line, sealed in the tower to hold the other end of the pact, ageless, waiting, a safeguard woven into the blood of every king who'd ever sit the throne. Her hawk's eyes were wet. The pact magic put its knowledge in you, so you'd know your king when he came. That's the name, child. That's the pull. You've carried the other half of the Halvern king's souls in a stone room for 300 years, and no king ever came to the door because every king was told the tower was a curse to be kept shut, not a gift to be claimed. The room was very quiet. Kaelin opened it. Ren whispered. On a whim, he said. There are no whims, Andrea said. In a thing 300 years in the waiting, the pact was frayed to its last thread. He'd have died of the drowning inside the season, and the magic knew it, and it pulled him. The same way it's pulled at you, your whole life, until the King of Halvern kicked open the one door no king was ever meant to open and found the other half of himself sitting on the sill. She reached out and took Ren's hand, and for once the sharp old physic's voice was thick. You weren't sealed away because you were worthless, girl. You were sealed away because you were precious. The most precious thing the first king had. They just forgot, over 300 years, that a treasure locked away long enough starts to look like a prisoner. And a keeper, forgotten long enough, starts to believe she was only ever a thing kept out of sight. Ren wept, then. Not the king this time, but Ren, for the small, forgotten thing she'd been for the years she remembered, and the far greater span she didn't, for the cage she'd built inside the cage. And the king, who had learned in a black flood how to hold a grieving person, held her, and understood exactly, because he had believed the identical lie about himself from the opposite direction, that he was a thing that deserved to drown. Two people, two cages, the same lie wearing two faces. So, the bond is real, the king said at last over her head. Not a curse, not a trick of a witch. Older than my whole line. Older than your whole line, Andrea agreed, and meant. You're two halves of one thing, and you have been fighting it. You out of fear, her out of a lifetime of learning not to want. Stop fighting it. The pact wants to be whole, not held apart. It's the only thing that ends the frayed magic for good, for both of you. Together you're a bond, apart you're two open wounds. She rose, gathering her brittle rolls, and paused at the door with the ghost of her old dryness. And the pair of you have wasted enough nights on gaps between beds. Even a 300-year-old magic runs out of patience. She left. The fire ticked. And the King of Halvern turned Ren gently by the shoulders to face him, and looked at her, really looked, the way he had in the tower doorway, except that neither of them was a stranger now, and the thing that passed between them was no longer only recognition. I opened that door, thinking I was walking into a curse, he said, and I found the other half of my soul, sitting in the light. His hand came up to her face, sure, this time, no fear left in it. I spent my life making certain I needed nothing. I need you. Not the bond, you. The girl who turned a man's tongue blue and cried over Yarrow and climbed across the gap. When I told you what I was. His forehead came down to rest against hers. Say it once more, my name. The way you said it, through the door. Kaelin, Ren whispered. And this time when she said it, the knot in her chest did not merely loosen, it opened, fully, at last, 300 years unclenched, and poured out warm and gold and complete into the space between them, and she felt his do the same, the two frayed halves of one ancient pact finally, simply, coming home. He kissed her, and there was no gap left anywhere. The court did not know what to make of it, of course. A foundling with no name, no house, no age, anyone could rightly count, seated at the king's right hand, where Varric's kind had expected to plant a daughter. It made for a great deal of talk, and some of the talk had knives in it, and the king handled the knives the way he handled everything, now plainly, without drowning in it. He told the council the truth, most of it, that the tower had never been a curse but a founding gift, that the girl was the oldest and most loyal servant the crown of Halvern had ever possessed, that she had held the other end of his line's own bargain faithfully for 3 centuries while the kings who owed her their strength let her rot behind a sealed door. He said it looking straight at Varric. Varric found, rather suddenly, a great many other places to direct his ambitions. They were bonded on the first true day of spring, in the 3rd courtyard that smelled of bread, and the small, solemn scullery girl who had once called Wren a ghost threw flower heads at them and announced to everyone within earshot that she had known all along the Tower Lady wasn't a thing the realm needed. Gone. She'd only been sad, and now she wasn't. Andri wept and pretended it was the pollen. Hullin, who had watched his king drown for a year, stood at the edge of it all with a rare unguarded smile. And, when the king caught his eye, gave a single small nod. Good. The tower still stood at the center of the keep. They left it standing, its iron door open now, forever, for the first time in 300 years. Wren went up sometimes in the evenings and sat on the sill by the 3rd window that caught the moon first. Not because the walls held her any more, but because from up there she could see the whole realm, laid out gold and green and impossibly large. The world she'd watched through one high window for so long, and could now walk out into whenever she pleased. And each night, in the great dark bed where a narrow one had once stood at a careful right angle across a cold gap, the king of Halvern slept, deeply, dreamlessly, whole, with his wife in his arms and the small carved wooden horse resting on the mantel where he could see it, so he would never forget the 40 souls he carried the right way now. Out in the light, without going under. Some mornings Wren woke first, in the pale dawn, and watched him sleep. The hard face gone soft and young, the shadows long gone from beneath his eyes, one arm thrown over her, even in sleep, as if the gap might return in the night, and he meant to guard against it. Then she would settle back against his shoulder, and close her eyes, and let herself do the thing she had forgotten how to do in all her long years of stone and remembered. At last, in his arms, she let herself simply want to be there. And she slept.